This week we go into the topic of self-initiation. And the question is, can I initiate myself? Or is self-initiation possible? I know there used to be a lot of debate about this topic anyway. I don't know if there still is. And a lot of people would say, well, they get the most benefit from working with a teacher. Others say that a teacher isn't necessary and that you can teach yourself. What I have found is that most people who try to teach themselves tend to, I guess, go astray, and there's a reason for that. Now, it certainly is possible to initiate yourself, okay? Or it might be more accurate to say it's possible to experience a legitimate self-initiation. Whether it's possible for you to initiate yourself, that's another issue, actually. So maybe we can delve into that a little bit. So when people take up the great work, let's say they get the Kabbalah magic book and they go through the process of the outer order grade curriculum, the big question is, well, if I do this, will I be rewarded with becoming a magician with powers, or will I receive initiation, whatever that is? Will I become enlightened as a result of the work that I do? And what most people bring into this process is something akin to the Protestant work ethic, where if you work hard, you will be rewarded, right? Is that always true? And in the Kabbalah magic book, I pretty much state right off the bat that there's no guarantee, and I even say that most people who begin this work will not succeed. And that's a harsh thing to say, but of course, for those who are motivated, let's say, to do the great work, it doesn't come across as a discouragement, because somehow we feel that there's something special about us and that we've been called to do this, and now I have a curriculum to work with, and let's do it now, okay? Maybe. So, is initiation even necessary? Ultimately, the answer is no. And there are some people who apparently have been born enlightened, basically with no automatic ego mechanism. Walt Whitman is apparently an example of that. If you look at examples of his life, this is somebody who never really had to go through some kind of a self-transformation process to become enlightened, like meditation or tantric ritual work or anything like that, or prayer, devotional prayer, things like that. But most of us do have to do some kind of work, and that the reason for that is humans have evolved into a state where they thrive, more or less, by developing an isolated sense of self that takes care of itself, that fusses over itself, and that maintains itself in a sort of gridlock psyche. And even though this causes us suffering, and it cuts us off from the world in terms of really harmonizing with the world and just experiencing a nice sense of flow and peace, it does help us survive, because it motivates us and pushes us and irritates us to take action that compels us to have children and produce offspring and then die so that they can take over, and then the whole thing continues on and on and on. Sounds very much like karma, doesn't it? And people in the East have noticed this for the longest time, that there's this great big biological machine has gotten up and running, and it's pretty much running the show, and it's pretty much doing its own thing right over our dead bodies. It pretty much just uses us to perpetuate the species and keep nature going on and on and on. And somehow the ability to enjoy this and the ability to break out of this artificial ego persona that the nervous system creates, somehow that is not a given. for us anymore, because we have evolved into this state where we have this ego persona that is now believes itself trapped inside the body, and it lives out its life inside the body. And when the body dies, it dies too. And then, oh, well, I guess that's all there is, right? So we're kind of trapped in that limited perception. And the idea is that we can break out of this. That's primarily what these kinds of curriculums are offering, at least the ones that are restored systems of enlightenment practices. This is something that the Golden Dawn attempted to do. At least most of its members knew that they were onto something really big by creating a system of restored enlightenment practices. The magical practices that proliferated across Europe were basically, they recognized corrupted systems of enlightenment practices that existed from ancient times, who knows when. Probably a system of enlightenment practices that were very much akin to Tantric Shaivism and Tibetan Buddhism, and versions of those apparently survived through the Egyptian mystery traditions and the Greek mystery traditions, and that kind of went underground in terms of maybe even some of the Christian mysteries at first anyway, and then disappeared underground because they were perceived as subversive, and anything that kind of sets the mind free from the perpetual machine that sustains the world is going to be perceived as subversive. But ultimately, these are systems of enlightenment practices that set the mind free from the ego construct that seems to be has sort of usurped its position in our lives and is kind of running our lives for us and making everything miserable, but it keeps everything going at the same time. Sort of like an inner tyrant that has taken over. In the mythology of ancient Egypt, it's Set who has taken over our lives, and Osiris has been dismembered and killed, right? And now it's our responsibility to reassemble Osiris and somehow resurrect him, and then defeat the evil Set, the evil ego. Destroy him? Not necessarily, because even in the ancient Egyptian mythology, Set was not necessarily destroyed. He was vanquished and then given a special role to play on the solar bark, which is a very interesting role, by the way, if you know what I'm talking about. So if I do the work, will I be rewarded? I guess you could say there's a sort of Christian dimension to the Golden Dawn, because the inner order of the Golden Dawn has a lot of Christian symbolism to it, with Christian Rosenkreuz and things like that. And that's because there's a perception that what happens to us as we go through the process of reaching for enlightenment is we realize we can't do it alone. In other words, of ourselves, we can't really do it. And so this idea of self-transformation, okay, it's a very profound concept. I mean, the very idea of self-transformation implies that you can initiate yourself, that you can be your own teacher, and you can reach enlightenment through your own study and your own ritual enactments, your own meditations. You can do it yourself. And this also implies that you can do it to yourself. Somehow grab hold of yourself and adjust things, and then suddenly now you're all better, and you can now be free of ego and experience a reconnection to the universe and universal harmony, and everything's fine. And, well, of course, what most of us find is that it's not that easy. Now, this idea that you can just grab hold of yourself and adjust yourself to be enlightened, that's how we start out, isn't it? And what we discover, though, is that there's something within us, if you call that the Christ force, or the Osiris current, or the inner saving grace, or if you're a Gnostic, you call it Sophia, Osiris risen, right? Something like that. There is a saving grace that comes along that does the work for us in spite of our efforts. to grab hold of ourselves and fix ourselves. Okay, so one of the main messages in the mysteries is that you can't do it yourself. That idea of grabbing hold of yourself and adjusting yourself, and then suddenly you're fixed and you're repaired and you're functioning properly. That's how we tend to start out, and we eventually realize that it isn't possible. But in the process of doing that, we thoroughly discover that it's not possible, and we end up surrendering to this inner grace that sort of just comes up and finishes the task for us. You might want to think of Lord of the Rings, where Frodo has to destroy the Ring of Power. And as he carries the Ring of Power, it's pretty obvious, if you haven't noticed it yet, that the Ring of Power is not only is it psychopathic, but it's an ego. But basically, he's carrying the weight of the ego, which is the source of all evil on earth, more or less, right? And the only person strong enough to destroy the ring is somebody who isn't that strong. So which is very interesting. Somebody weak enough to surrender to destiny, let's say, right? And what you'll notice, my point is that in the end of The Lord of the Rings, spoiler alert, in the end of Lord of the Rings, Frodo is not strong enough to destroy the ring, actually. It actually ends up corrupting him in the end. But the interesting thing is, all the momentum that he gets going because he keeps trying and pushing so hard and putting one foot in front of the other, keeps going, the momentum that he has established carries out the process unto ultimate fulfillment for him. So even though in the end he's not strong enough to destroy the Ring of Power, the momentum of the quest that he has already established finishes it for him anyway. And this is kind of what happens when we do this kind of work, this kind of tantric self-transformation work. I use the word tantric very loosely, in case you guys haven't noticed that yet. But what I mean by tantric is that you don't necessarily have to have a path of meditation where you just sit there quietly and, wait for your demons to come to you. With Tantra, you actually beat the bushes and ferret them out and confront them, and you really drive this process of self-transformation much more actively. That's Tantra. Tantra essentially means transformation. You don't wait for the transformation to happen. You drive the process of the transformation. Yeah, this is very serious business, guys, okay? So there's this idea of lineage. Well, if you're going to reach enlightenment, you have to have a teacher. And they themselves had to have had a teacher before them, who had a teacher before them, who had a teacher before them. And there's this long lineage of people who are passing along the torch of wisdom from teacher to disciple to who becomes a teacher, who passes the torch on to disciple, and et cetera, right? And when I first heard the idea of lineage, I thought it was ridiculous. It's like I have to base my initiation on the prestige of previous adepts. So I can say that, oh, my teacher was so-and-so, and their teacher was so-and-so, and their teacher was the great, super powerful so-and-so, and look how wonderful my lineage is. So, of course, I thought that was silly. Because, first of all, we already know that people can be born enlightened, at least, well, we know that now anyway from this video, and that teachings and lineages are not even necessary, that the process of enlightenment is mysterious unto itself, and it happens where it happens. All right. So, eventually, I met some adepts of the Golden Dawn who were legit, who were the real deal. And then I realized the importance of a teacher. Could I have initiated myself? I think I could have, don't we all, right? But I have to say that having met them, it completely boosted my progress. For many people, it turns the whole thing around, completely upside down and backwards. So they're like, oh, now I know what we're doing if they meet a teacher for the first time. Okay. For me, it was a huge catalyst. So it just kind of rocketed me forward. And I have to say, it was not really the rituals that we did together necessarily. It's almost as though the Golden Dawn teachings and the practices were more of an excuse just to get me into the presence of an adept so that they could somehow magically rub off on me and that I'd be up and running on my own. So this is how important lineage can actually be, just to meet somebody and interact with somebody who is, for the most part, free of the ego construct. A completely transformational experience for many people. In alchemy, it's referred to as a catalyst. So if you don't know by now, the Philosopher's Stone is actually, in one way of looking at it, it's actually a person. In other words, somebody who transmutes himself into gold via the Philosopher's Stone. He becomes a stone himself, and he is a Philosopher's Stone then who, in the presence of other students, then it serves as a catalyst for their transformation into gold and into the Philosopher's Stone. And the gold begets more gold, which begets more gold. So that's the idea of lineage, where there's this spark of integrity that is imparted from one person to another. Can that spark be conveyed through a book? Yes, I think it can. Can it be conveyed through art? Yes, it can. But it is most powerfully conveyed from teacher to student, or just from person to person. And yes, the adept is somebody who can change things and turn things around simply by showing up, simply by being in the room somehow and interacting, I guess, with other people. But what they do is not necessarily, words of power and magic sigils and things like that. That doesn't mean that words of power and magic sigils are not important, because they are something that you use in your own personal life to facilitate your own transformation. But one of the most important things about your own transformation process is exposure to others who have been through that process and who are largely free of the ego construct. So in the absence of a teacher, what do we do? And this is where it gets difficult, because many people criticize the curriculum in the Kabbalah magic book as being very strict. In other words, you can't do any practical magic until you're done with the whole thing, which can actually take several years to complete. In fact, it does take several years to complete. Okay, well, that's probably unavoidable. Even working with a teacher, you're probably going to be working for several years or longer, or even till the end of your life, who knows, going about your self-transformation process. So in the absence of a teacher, the best you can do is to do the curriculum as it's laid out and do not change anything in it. The main reason for that is, the best way to describe it is that when you are lost in the ego construct, which is a life of unsatisfactoriness or suffering that you're trying to break out of, you want to be happy, right? And the problem is the way that you imagine yourself getting out of that is the very manner in which you maintain that state of suffering. Okay, and this is why when you go to therapy, the therapist listens very closely to how you imagine yourself getting better. Because then they know, the thing that's got them stuck is their belief in this thing that's going to make them better, which they keep going after and going after and going after, which is only serving, or mainly serving, to perpetuate the problem to begin with. So if you take up a magical curriculum like the Kabbalah magic book, then if you take bits and pieces of it and just use what you want to, and then combine it with other stuff you learned over here and some stuff you learned over there, and you're kind of mixing and matching. You are proceeding under your own guidance, and then very likely you are sabotaging your own progress, because the manner in which you're proceeding is the very manner in which you have been perpetuating your suffering, and the way that your forefathers have been perpetuating their suffering. It's not your fault. It's simply the belief mechanisms that we have going on. We keep relying on those things to make it work for us. And so we take a curriculum like the Kabbalah magic curriculum, and we just use it in a certain way which perpetuates what we already have going on, and nothing ever changes, and the karma continues. Okay, hope I've explained that. Now, if you do the curriculum as told, there's still a risk, because on very subtle levels, you're still subverting it into your own system of magic, and you're trying to push it in directions where you think it's going to make you all better. One of the main points of doing this kind of work is that the main goal is not to cure yourself, or not to try to get better, or not to try to even transform yourself. Kind of the ultimate realization is that there's nothing actually wrong with you. Yeah, so the only thing that's wrong with this is that we think there's something wrong. Okay, that's too much to go into there, but I think you can kind of catch a drift that you're just kind of dropping the whole concept of that there's something wrong with the world, there's something wrong with me, there's something wrong with this, there's something wrong with that. No, these things, as we do the work, get picked apart, and they drop away. Okay, but in the meantime, to try to make that happen, you're going to be proceeding in ways that very likely are going to sabotage your own progress towards freedom from all that suffering, or whatever you call that world weariness or jadedness. And so it's very helpful then to have a teacher. Okay, but of course it's not necessarily going to look like this, where the Dr. Strange-like figure is teaching you how to raise spirits right off the pages of a book. Don't you love AI? It's more like just spending time with a teacher and interacting with them, having conversations with them. Okay, and of course, yeah, you can do ritual work with them, or have them do Reiki therapy on you, or massage or something like that. Sure, all these are really very much more excuses just to interact with them, to get you exposed to a manner of seeing that is free of the ego construct. Yeah, and that manner of seeing becomes, it's contagious. That the person in your life acts as a catalyst to your own transformation by showing you, even only briefly, what's possible for you. It doesn't take much to give you a little glimpse. And that glimpse into enlightenment can be devastating sometimes, because everything that you've thought was important up until that point is no longer important anymore. And then everything falls away and you don't know what to do, because you've met this person who has shown you that most of what you've been doing is futile. And then what do you do? Then you turn to some kind of, oh no, help me, like some teacher. Hopefully the teacher is legit and can actually help you with the self-transformation process. Or you turn to a curriculum like Zen Buddhism or something like that, or a teacher program, or Tantric Shaivism, or Tibetan Buddhism, or Golden Dawn magic. Yeah. So what is really required? Okay. Surprisingly, not much interaction with a teacher is really necessary. One encounter might be enough to sort of just rattle the cage enough so you are now, now I know what's going on here, right? And when I was in a Golden Dawn temple, most of the work I was doing by myself. It really was a self-transformation type thing, right? Uh, and but the work that I was doing involved a phone call with the actual landline and everything, because the internet didn't exist at the time, and a phone call once a month. And I think it was a letter through snail mail once per week. It's like a back and forth mail. And of course, eventually the internet came along and email, but that was towards the end of my curriculum work, by the way, when the internet really took off. And so it really was only contact with them by phone once a month and then a letter once a week. But there were several retreats as well when I went out to the temple and had the 0 = 0 ritual performed. And of course, other things like lectures and other group ritual and things like that and lectures. But the biggest benefit I got from hanging out with my teachers, especially one of them, was simply hanging out with them. It's just being with them, talking to them, even watching TV with them. That's back when we used to watch TV. Do we still do that anymore? And so conditions necessary for beginning. If you're considering taking up the curriculum in the Kabbalah Magic Book, all that's required really is a patch of floor and privacy where you can do ritual for about an hour a day or less, undisturbed. And I really mean that, undisturbed. Nobody comes knocking. They know that there's a certain time of day, or like when this sign's on your door, they don't bother you. Okay, and of course, the ability to chant or vibrate in that space relatively loudly needs to be possible. None of this, I use the great voice, I can just vibrate on the inner planes. No, use your voice loud and clear and resonant. So yeah, having a ritual space like that is all that's really required to begin. If you don't have that, I wouldn't recommend starting the Kabbalah Magic curriculum. Okay, if you don't have a space where you can do that, you might want to make a goal to establish getting a space where that's possible. Okay, and in the absence of that, you can start out with things like Zen philosophy, and maybe go to if you have a Dharma center nearby, Tibetan Buddhism also, they can offer modes of practice where you can do that you can use to explore spirituality, whatever, like that, until maybe eventually you can get a private space where you can be undisturbed for about an hour every day. Okay. Now, naturally, in the Kabbalah Magic Book, there's all kinds of projects which are optional. You can make elemental weapons, and of course, there's study practices involved. There's a lot of reading involved. There's some drawing involved. Okay, cataloging of Egyptian god names and Greek god names and things like that. There's study involved too. Yes, but the only thing you really need is that ritual space where once a day for about an hour you can do some dramatic ritual practice. All right. So that being said, can you initiate yourself? Sort of, right. You can begin the self-initiation process, but what eventually will happen is that process will hopefully call something forth which finishes the job for you. So the answer is yes and no, right? Can you really initiate yourself? Ultimately not, but you can start a process that comes forth. It's kind of like a gardener can't really grow his garden, right? But he can set up the conditions in which a garden can grow, and then he can just wait to see what happens as he continuously maintains it. And what he gets is not necessarily what he thought what he was going to get, but something apparently comes from it, right? And of course, all kinds of things can happen along the way to sabotage those efforts, and he messes up and does things wrong, and then he has to self-correct. And of course, it's very much like that, the self-initiation process. And one of the benefits of this YouTube channel is that I'm providing a jumping off point to Patreon, where you can actually join me on Patreon and have some intensive one-on-one chat interactions with me, like direct messages back and forth, if you join me on Patreon. And of course, I am available for consultation. So you can get that kind of exposure that can act as a catalyst, hopefully, to kind of to spur you on in the process of self-transformation, so that that mysterious garden will eventually come forth and come into full bloom for you, whatever that is. What do I mean by that? By becoming somebody who is enlightened or has enlightenment experiences, and somebody who is able to operate in the world in a magical way. Not somebody who can cast spells and get what you want. It's not really like that. It's more like it certainly appears that's what you're doing. And you're able to do spiritual practices that sort of tweak the flow of manifestation around you. But it's very much still very much the same, very, very much like what a gardener does. He does this, and then a result comes out of it. Of course, the result he's getting is like, that's not quite what I expected, but wow. Okay, that's more what magical practice is really like. Anyway, so I think that if I set this up correctly, there's going to be a link to the Patreon, like right about here, appearing. Hopefully, it's going to appearing there right now. So, all right. So until next time, and I hope to see you guys on Patreon.